Welcome to an India Today world exclusive. India Today has been able to access satellite images, high resolution, minute detail satellite images of yesterday's site of confrontation. For months now, our open source intelligence team has been working with Planet Labs, which is one of the world's leading satellite imagery companies. And I now present to you, we've been working over the last several hours to try and piece this together. In a moment from now, I will take you literally to the site of the confrontation between the Indian and the Chinese armies. These images were procured from Planet Labs and they are of yesterday. And you will see in visual detail how the two armies are stacked against each other. Just so that you have a geographical context of what you're about to see, I'll start by explaining that the point that I'm about to take you to is the Galwan flashpoint, which is along the line of actual control. On this side is Ladakh, the other side is Aksai Chin, which is currently under Chinese occupation. This is a closer shot. You've seen this earlier, so this is not what we're going to show you, but this is just so that you have context about what you're about to see. This is the DSDBO road, the Darbuk Shok Dalat Beg Oldie road. The blue line depicts the Shok river. This is the Galwan river flashpoint. And here is PP14, which is Patrol Point 14, which is the site of confrontation. I want to take you even further, just so that you have a sense of what you're about to see, and then we'll dive really deep. Okay, this is the point of confluence of the Galwan river and the Shok river. These are the two Indian Army and ITBP camps. This area roughly is where the confrontation took place. Remember, we're still very far away. I'm taking you as close as I can to the site of the confrontation. So this is Galwan flashpoint, Patrol Point 14. I want to take you in even further, and after this I'll show you the satellite imagery. So this roughly is where we were at yesterday. These pictures are from Google Earth, working with military cartographers. We've placed the locations of the various army bases and where the Chinese came in from. So this is the Galwan River, and here is Patrol Point 14. As I told you, this is where the Chinese army came from. So here is their Huvitian army base. These are the two Chinese posts. It's about 50 kilometers as you come in, and the Chinese had come here. The Indian army is on the other side. Okay, so now that you have some context, get set for the first time that we're about to show you high quality, high resolution pictures where, if you bear with me, I'll also show you the vehicles that are arranged, the Indian military combat vehicles, the Chinese combat vehicles, and the deployment. So here it is, coming up on your screen right now, the first high resolution picture. So here is, right now we're very zoomed out. I'll take you in deep, but broadly, just so that you're clear, this is the Galwan River, this is the Galwan River Valley, the other side is the Indian areas, and as I start zooming in, and you will see now, you will see as we start zooming in, actual Chinese military deployment. Okay, so because this is high resolution, I said that's why this is magic. You can actually see, and I hope, okay, can you see this? All these are camps and these are vehicles. Lined along this narrow river valley are the vehicles and the camps. This is Chinese deployment very close to the line of actual control. So when you say that there is massive Chinese deployment, I just want to see a real screen so that I can see whether you can see this well or not. Okay, so I think you can see this well. You can actually see these vehicles all along the Galwan River. Here you can see these are Chinese vehicles. So when we talk about a massive build-up, this is what it is. Just stay with me. So as I said, here I can now show you the Indian vehicles here. This here, one second, here we go. So here are the Indian vehicles. So if you see this, our build-up is much lesser actually. You've got some vehicles here, you've got a camp there, and you've got hutments here, you've got temporary camps here. So this side is the Indian side, and on this side is the Chinese army as I go in further. So what we did to try and explain this better to you is actually to take you to the next map. Here you go. Now we've actually just zoomed in so that you can see this. If you see this map, you will see the entire Chinese deployment. You will see A massive, when you say massive, this is what massive really means. And remember, as I told you, this is the Planet Lab satellite from yesterday. So yesterday is when these pictures were taken. This is a day after the conflict. Here you see the kind of deployment the Chinese have. So they've got a huge number of weapon systems, huge number of vehicles that have been brought in, and they've set up camps. So they've set up some tents. I want to take you to our next picture. Now all of this is essentially from that one large mega high resolution picture. Here you see on this side the Chinese deployment. Can you see this on your screen? Yeah, I see, you can see very clearly, and that's good, because I'm assured by the fact that you can see this. This is the Chinese deployment on the other side of Patrol Point 14, and from this satellite picture, when you're talking about whether it's a big deployment or a small deployment, it actually visually brings alive what we've been talking about here on India Today. So Ankit Kumar is our reporter in the open source intelligence team. He is the one who's been working with Planet Labs for months now. He's secured these pictures. Shiv Arur is really one of the best defense voices in our country. He's joining us on this broadcast as well. Ankit Kumar, first and foremost, congratulations on being able to scoop these pictures. They actually bring alive in very real visual detail the build-up on the Chinese side. You've been speaking to the open source experts at Planet Labs. Give our viewers your best sense of what you've been able to understand from these images. Ankit, take it away.
So Rahul, as far as the information part is concerned, these, apart from giving the visual idea, these images give us three set of explicit information. First is that despite being outnumbered by the Chinese troops and facing casualties, these images suggest that the Indian troops are holding on to their positions. So that's the first takeaway. Second is what we call the Chinese diplomatic screw job. Last week, the Chinese foreign minister issued a statement that both India and China have reached an agreement on properly handling the situation, and both sides were talking actions in line with the agreement. Now, what these images are showing is that China actually used this time, the de-escalation process, to build up its troops in guise of this de-escalation. Third important point is, if you look closely, the forward Chinese buildup is divided in three parts. First is the forward buildup, which is there you can count 20-30 vehicles. The middle part, you can count at least 50 or 60 vehicles. But in the trail, in the back part of the Chinese trail, you can count at least 120 armored vehicles. So that is what Chinese has been doing, and this is the first visual proof of what China has actually done. China has actually used the de-escalation process to build up on its part a huge army buildup, a huge troop buildup, and that gives us a sense of what might have happened on June 15 in Galwan River Valley. How?
Shiv Arur has been working on these pictures as well with Ankit. Shiv, you've had an opportunity to assess yourself firsthand the images that Ankit has been able to procure from the maps that we had till yesterday, from the new maps that Ankit's now got. Give our viewers your understanding of the situational report on the ground.
Two big takeaways from this, Rahul. Point number one, at Patrol Point 14, which is where this very bloody and brutal battle took place, it is very clear that no disengagement has happened. If anyone has reported any kind of disengagement, these pictures completely debunk any claims of a disengagement. Rather, what these Planet Lab satellite images show is that not only are the Chinese not disengaging, but they appear to have mobilized an even larger number in terms of vehicles and camps in that particular area, vastly outnumbering the Indian forces there. The Indian forces are standing strong, they're holding on to their ground, but they are surrounded, and they've got they're vastly outnumbered in terms of the number of the Chinese forces. Point number two, these pictures take place exactly 10 days after the Lieutenant General level talks in Chushul, Moldo, Rahul, and 24 hours after that horrible brawl on that Yellow Ridge area overlooking the Galwan River. Now, what these images, especially the fourth and the fifth image, suggest is that the Chinese, far from disengaging, there may have been some token disengagement for a couple of tents, which they mysteriously brought back, which was actually the trigger point for the bloodletting that happened on Monday night. But the mobilization in the in the near depth areas, about a kilometer behind, is extremely disturbing. Lots of military vehicles, more encampments, more backup forces suggest that this was not only premeditated, but the Chinese had no intention to disengage. So what was that Lieutenant General level talks all about? What were they thinking? They had already decided that disengagement was off the table. They had agreed about it. The Foreign Office had talked about it. But these images show that they had no intention to pull back, Rahul. That's the big takeaway for me.
Very, very crucial, because as I said, here's where we are. In this map, what you see is the Indian side of the line of actual control. The build-up on the Indian side was here, and what I'm able to do now is actually take you there from a satellite picture from yesterday to show you just the kind of build-up there is on the Indian side vis-a-vis the Chinese. Remember, till the 6th of June, when this disengagement talk happened between the Indian Lieutenant General and the Chinese Major General, the Indians after that started disengaging. They started pulling back. The Chinese said they were disengaging, but that is a lie, and now we have visual proof to substantiate it, because this is the river, and if you see along the river, you've got a huge Chinese deployment. Now, you know, as I said, from what we can see from the top, a lot of these seem like tents. Some of them seem like vehicles, but that's the deployment that you can see, and it's a massive deployment going all the way along the river basin on the other side. So this is not a small deployment by any means. There is absolutely no question about the fact that this isn't a small deployment. This is a substantial deployment. Remember, right now we're on the Chinese side of the Galwan River, and that's the deployment. So they came in, as I said, and this is what, if you've been following our coverage, we've been saying this from the first day. The Chinese have a kacha rasta, you know, it's not a tarred road, and that you can see here very clearly. It's a dirt track. Using that dirt track along the river basin, they have been able to come in. And a lot of what we were telling you so far now coming true in these images taken just from yesterday. If I go even further, one more time. Okay, 1 second. This is the high-res picture, and the thing about the high-res picture is I can also show you what's happening on the Indian side. So, as I showed you, the Chinese build-up was happening here, and here you can see the Indian build-up as well. So, if you see, it's not as if there is no Indian build-up. There are on the same river basin, there is an Indian build-up as well, but it's a much smaller build-up. It's a much smaller build-up in comparison to the Chinese build-up. So we were honoring our promise to the Chinese and pulling back as had been agreed. So you can see the difference in the quantum of the build-up on the Indian side vis-a-vis the Chinese side. The Indians have far scarce. So some of these look like military vehicles, 3 tons and jongas, and some of them look like tents, and some of them are hutments. However, on the Indian side of the river, and this is the Indian side and this is patrol, roughly here is patrol point 14, which you saw in the map that I showed you. Here you see again the Indian build-up here. So you can see this. This is roughly the point of confrontation, where if you see the kind of build-up there is on the Chinese side, you can almost see here the Indian build-up, scarce, we're there but not in as many numbers, and then you see the massive build-up on the Chinese side. There's a huge build-up on the Chinese side, and Shiv, that becomes abundantly clear. The advantage with these satellite images is, unlike what may come through in years gone by from the PR wings of either of the armies or the governments, the satellite images speak for themselves, and as they say, each of these images speaks more than 1,000 words.
And you know, I think the most disturbing aspect of what Ankit has accessed through Planet Labs here, you know, is something that should be rippling through the security system right now, Rahul, because as we put out these world exclusive images of the mountain of blood and the area surrounding it in Ladakh, where we've lost at least 20 army men, I also want to remind all of our viewers that this situation has happened despite over 25 rounds of talks. Rahul, Colonel Santosh Babu himself has been involved in military level talks at the local level. And there are other battalion commanders like him who've also had colonel to colonel talks. You've had brigadier level talks, major general level talks, and crucially the historic lieutenant general level talks. So these pictures the context of these pictures is those Lieutenant General and Major General level talks was precisely to erase what you're seeing on your screen right now. It was to remove all these vehicles, it was to remove all these tents in a phased manner. But the very fact that these images are from June the 16th, that is yesterday, only proves that not only did the Chinese not disengage, but they never had any intention to. And I have no doubts in my mind, and I wouldn't be surprised, Rahul, if the actual numbers on the ground have actually increased on the Chinese side. Because if their plan was way beyond muscle flexing, it was about changing the front lines, changing the LAC, creating a new front line in the Galwan Valley, which they've now started to claim as their own, then these numbers really establish the truth on the ground. There was no question of any disengagement. Far from it. Even while shaking hands with the Indian Lieutenant General in Chushul, Moldo, these vehicles were rumbling towards these points. That is the level of the treachery we're seeing here, Rahul.
Abhishek Bhalla also joins us on this broadcast. He tracks the Defence Ministry for us. And we've got Shiv Arur and Ankit Kumar joining us as well. Remember, these images really tell their own story. So if anybody is trying to tell you that there's been a massive pullback and that the Chinese have now gone back home, that isn't the case, because just on the other side of this point of confrontation, we're now able to prove through the images that are screeching loud on your screen that there is an unprecedented mammoth military buildup by the Chinese army. India, in all the calculations in terms of taking decisions, needs to keep that in mind. Now, Ankit, on this map, can you point out for our viewers the exact spot of confrontation? So we figured out in this map where the Chinese army is, we figured out where the Indian deployment is, where specifically, and you talk and I'll take our viewers, I'll zoom in, I'll try and explain to our viewers, try and explain where exactly day before's clash happened. Ankit.
Well, the exact point of clash that we have been able to assess is near the PP14 point, because that is where that was a no man's land until last week when the de-escalation was agreed upon. And when you sort of move towards the Chinese side from PP14, you will see that there is a part where there is a river, and on one side of the river, you will see a huge buildup of the Chinese side, and on the other side of the river, there are a smaller number of vehicles. They are most likely to be from the Indian side. Now, what is more important here about these images is that you can actually count the number of vehicles on your fingers. You can see that there was only one side which was following the de-escalation process. If you start counting these vehicles on the Chinese side, you can easily count as much as 200 military vehicles on the Chinese side. Now, contrary to that, on Indian side, I tried to count them. I could not find as much as 100. So that shows the huge disproportionation. This also shows that how much China used this time of de-escalation to actually build up the troops on its side. What it also shows is that the Foreign Ministry of China was saying something else, and the PLA on ground was doing something else. So this may be, as the experts have been suggesting, a watershed moment as far as how India deals with China, because Indian army, trusting the words of Chinese military leaders and diplomats, followed the de-escalation process. But as we can see from these images, we can count the number of Chinese military vehicles. They are more than 200 Chinese military vehicles in compared to less than 100 Indian vehicles on the ground. Rahul?
Okay, Abhishek Bhalla also joins us. Abhishek, you've been speaking to sources in the Ministry of Defence, and Army headquarters. What are they making of this big breaking image that's been put out by India today? Satellite images that show the quantum of the military build-up, even at this moment on the Chinese side of the line of actual control.
Rahul, these images further vindicate what sources have been telling us till now, that, it was this de-escalation that was planned, but it did not happen. And this pullback which was expected from both the sides, clearly there was some kind of a backstabbing as far as China is concerned, because now these images also confirm what we've been hearing through sources, that both the sides were supposed to pull back after a round of meetings that took place on Monday itself, and later in the evening when the Indian party reached the spot of confrontation to see what's actually happening. We were outnumbered. We realized that, the Chinese were present there in much bigger numbers than before, and that's when the clash took place. Clearly, there has been a lot of trust deficit as far as the two armies is concerned, and that's what led to this fresh escalation. What sources are saying is that the situation on the ground is extremely volatile. That's how multiple sources have described the situation to me, and they are saying that as of now, even though military level talks will continue, the focus of those talks will be to ensure that calm returns and there are no fresh scuffles or violence like the one that happened 2 days back. But there is an alert not just for Galwan in the Ladakh region, but across the line of actual control after what happened on Monday night.
So these images establishing in startling detail that China's treachery was premeditated. This was not a spontaneous action that took place in the Galwan Valley by any stretch of trusted even one single inch. This is a country that has reneged and violated a handshake agreement between lieutenant generals just 10 days before. All of these things, you see us highlighting all those tents and vehicles on that pathway. All of those things should have been reduced by now. There should have been a disengagement. And when an Indian Army commanding officer, Colonel Santosh Babu, went to investigate why the Chinese hadn't begun to disengage and had mysteriously brought back one of the camps in an area very close to this, he was murdered. He was murdered in cold blood along with 19 other Indian Army men. A certain number of Chinese soldiers and their commanding officer are also understood to have been killed, but there is no categorical confirmation on that information just yet. But these images that India Today's Ankit Kumar has accessed via Planet Labs tell you the full truth. And these are not archival or file footage images that certain other channels will try to fool their viewers with. These are images from Planet Labs of June the 16th, authenticated, latest images taken place that have been taken just about 12 to 15 hours ago, and they give you a full sense of what the situation precisely is on the ground right now. I want to bring in Abhishek Balla, defense editor, who's with us. Abhishek, while our viewers sort of digest the implications of these images, and we've explained it very clearly here on India Today, what's happening on the ground today? Are there more talks taking place today?
Shiv, whatever talks are taking place now are only to ensure that, there is calm that can prevail in that region, because neither of the two armies want another escalation or a fresh round of violence after the brutality of Monday night. But as far as, other engagements between the two armies are concerned, there is a lot of trust deficit. What sources are saying is that things cannot be taken on face value. One source told me that firm action is required on the ground to ensure that, the Chinese do not indulge in any kind of violence like they did on Monday night. And these images that we've put out only vindicate and corroborate what we've been hearing from sources till now, that there was a disengagement plan that was drawn out by the two armies, but for some reason China did not adhere to it, and that's the reason why that was the trigger that led to this fresh violence. That's when an Indian patrol team had gone to check whether the disengagement is actually taking place, but the situation was completely different from what was discussed. This pullback was not restricted to just troops, but also the armor and the artillery that was brought close to the line of actual control was supposed to move back further, at least by 5 kilometers. But nothing of that sort happened on ground, and that's what triggered this brutal escalation in which 20 Indian soldiers were killed. We hear that Chinese casualties also have taken place, but no official word on it from the Chinese side.
Rajnath Singh has just provided the political leadership's first response to the carnage. He's tweeted out a message saying he condemns what has happened and that he thanks the heroes for their sacrifice. Of course, there are going to be very, very tough questions for the government, and we will not hesitate to ask those questions. No word just yet from the Prime Minister. Perhaps the Prime Minister will also be speaking. We don't know that just yet, but if he is, you will find out about that first here on India Today. Rajnath Singh, the Defence Minister, has spoken. High-level discussions have been happening since late last night. All of India's war rooms are fully up and alert and functional over what the next steps are actually going to be. Ankit Kumar, who has accessed these images from Planet Labs that paint this extremely troubling situation, but I have to be very honest and candid with you. I'm not surprised in the least that this is actually the reality on the ground in the Galwan Valley, because at no point has India Today suggested that a disengagement of anything more than a token action has taken place in the Galwan Valley. And now we know even that token action was premeditated to bait Indian soldiers into a bloody clash. That is what the truth is. We have to live with that truth and figure out what comes next. Ankit, these images establish Chinese designs in more ways than one, don't they? Because these images come just 10 days after the Indian and Chinese sides met at the Lieutenant General level, the highest level that they've ever interacted in their military history. And that is really an indication that the Chinese were not serious at all during talks. They had absolutely no plans to keep their promises during that handshake.
That's right, Shiv. And what happened during the military leaders meeting, that is not on record. At least that is not in public domain. But what is in public domain is the last week's briefing of the Chinese Foreign Ministry. The spokesperson clearly said, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson clearly said that, and I'm quoting them, that both India and China have reached an agreement on properly handling the situation, and both sides were taking actions in line with the agreement to ameliorate. Now, this is what they have done after issuing this statement. A foreign ministry of a country like China issued a statement that de-escalation process is underway through military channels and diplomatic channels. And after issuing this statement, what Chinese PLA does is it, doubles the number of the presence of its troops in the Galwan River Valley, and through these images, we can count the number of military vehicles that are on ground yesterday, that is on June 16. And we can match that with what India has done. Clearly, these images show that there was only one party, there was only one country which was actually following the de-escalation process in letter and spirit. The other part was planning this, I do not know what the right word for it, but the other part was planning this military action. It was a well-planned action, and the 20 Indian soldiers who have died, that is not by virtue of an accident. It is a well-planned PLA action. Shiv?
I want to take our viewers once again through each and every one of these images. There are a total of 6 satellite images that have been accessed, and they give you a sense. Remember that there are 4 standoff points between India and China in Ladakh. The Galwan Valley happens to be one of them. There are 2 more in the hot springs area, and one famously on the banks of the Pangong Lake in the Finger Four area. This is the 4th standoff point if you're going from south to north. This is at the mouth of the Galwan River, and it is called Patrol Point 14. Now, at this particular area, not far west from this zone, is where India had been building a road that will access the subsector north. That's the northern parts of Ladakh, like Daulat Beg, Oldi, etc. Now, the Chinese began to mobilize in this manner, in a very unusual manner, crossing the line of control and squatting on territory that is claimed by India. There has been dispute over some of the area, but where the Chinese have been sitting is territory claimed by India and has been patrolled by both sides. A total act of aggression for over 40 days. On June the 6th, Lieutenant Generals, after lots of talks between various levels, yielded nothing, including talks held by Colonel Santosh Babu, who was killed by the Chinese day before yesterday night, but they yielded nothing. Then Lieutenant Governors spoke precisely to disengage and de-escalate the situation that is represented by these images taken on June the 16th. But 10 days and nothing has changed. But forget about 10 days. After that Lieutenant General level talks, where it seemed like everything was going to return to normal, there were certain journalists who reported that there was a disengagement already underway. None of that actually happened. The fact is the Chinese squatted there, they stayed put. And if I'm not fully an expert to say this with the satellite imagery, but there is a possibility that they even increase their numbers. Ankit, I want to get that clarity from you. Is it possible that rather than disengage, the Chinese have actually mobilized in larger numbers in this area?
See, we do not have a high resolution image from last week's show, but what we do have is a low resolution image. Now, the low resolution image that we last analyzed was from June 4, 5, and 6. What those images showed was that during that period, Chinese army actually took a step back. The distance between the two armies actually increased by about 2.5 to 3 kilometers. But this deployment that we are seeing right now is unprecedented. This deployment, we can conclusively say, it was not there until last week. So Chinese army has increased this deployment during the de-escalation process, is what we are saying based on visual evidence. Through these images, you can actually count the number of Chinese vehicles that are there on the ground, and you can find that there are at least 200 military vehicles in the Chinese side. Now, what is important to point out here is, we are talking about everything, but what is more important to point out here is that despite being outnumbered by the Chinese troops and facing casualties, these images also tell us that Indian troops are holding their positions. We have not conceded any land as far as the Indian troops are concerned. The position of the Indian troops, which was there last week, we can still find Indian troops there. So despite facing a number of casualties that we have reported yesterday and today, Indian army is still holding its point. But the fact that Chinese army used the process of de-escalation to actually increase its troop movement, because Indian army was actually matching the Chinese strength before the de-escalation process started. As the de-escalation process began, Indian side started to move back, but that was not the case with the Chinese side. What the Chinese side did was they used this process to increase the number of troops from their side, and that is exactly what is visible in these images. Shiv?
Okay, that's what's visible in these images, the mobilization, the numbers, the fact that they, decided not to pull back at all. That is what is clear and established here.
Hi everyone, Preeti Chaudhary here. Hope you like this video. For latest news and analysis, like and subscribe to the India Today YouTube channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated. Thank you for watching.